Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the Phia Group.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you again for joining us on the Phia Group podcast that I like to call the C&C Subrogation Factory. Here today with my colleague out in, I don't know exactly where in Kentucky she is, but out in our Louisville office. Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Merrell, and I'm a subrogation attorney here at Phia, and I am excited to be here today.
Obviously, for anyone that's been following the organization knows me, Chris Aguiar. I've been with the organization since 2005. It feels like I'm furniture here now. Certainly, I don't feel like I ever get to leave. So furniture or not, I'm a staple of the building. You know, it's interesting, Cindy. I went back, and I don't know if you're going to notice this when I say it. I went back and I listened to the last one, and I was floored at how fast I was talking. And I don't know if that's always the case. I think when I'm on calls with clients, I've come to the place where I can slow myself down. But on that podcast, boy, I was like what's that car guy? The Micro Machines guy, I think it was. The little car guy that used to talk on the commercials. The little car, he's not little, the cars are little. I was floored by how fast I was talking. So I'm going to try to make a very conscious effort to slow down my pace a little bit because it drove me insane. If it drove me insane, I can only imagine how some of the listeners felt. And I haven't had time to go back and see some of the older ones. Maybe I just had too much coffee.
Maybe you were just very passionate about that topic.
Yeah, I don't know what it was. And then I'm going to have to go do some research to see if that's my speed on podcasts or what. But today I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit so that people don't have to rewind just to hear what the heck I'm saying. But anyway, we've got an interesting topic today. It's one that's interesting because it kind of highlights a lot of different things. Most importantly, the fact that it's really important to remember in subrogation cases that everyone involved in the case wants there to be more money. In the vast majority of cases, anyone that has talked to me or has been involved in a case with me, or really anyone at the organization that you've heard us say this, in the vast majority of cases, there is not that much money to go around. And that's simply because we have an awkward problem in healthcare subrogation specifically. And that awkward problem is that the government, the federal government mainly, has created the paradigm that there is no limit to what a health benefit plan must pay. We all know that prior to Obamacare or Biden Care or Romney Care or whatever you want to call it, prior to the Affordable Care Act, health plans had a $1 million lifetime maximum. Once participants hit that max, they effectively no longer had coverage under that plan. Now, maybe they could go get coverage on other plans or through some purchasing their own insurance. That came with challenges too, though, because as we know, there also used to be pre-existing condition limitations. So before the Affordable Care Act, there were a lot of hurdles for plan participants to obtain coverage in scenarios where they had large claims, either in a third-party liability type situation or they got really sick or whatever the case may be. Those hurdles for the participants effectively were protections for the benefit plans. And the Affordable Care Act pulled those protections. Now, that's one of those double-edged swords, right? On the one hand, as a person, yay, everyone should have a right to health care. In the mechanism we've chosen to deliver it, we probably should not arbitrarily limit a person's right to get it. On the other hand, as a professional in this world, we can understand that, limitless liability creates some problems. So on the other side, this is the world that we operate very heavily in, you have auto insurance companies. And auto insurance companies, participants are able to purchase whatever policy they want. Now, in some states, there are some required minimums, but in Massachusetts, I don't know what they are in Kentucky. In the state of Massachusetts, you are allowed to purchase a liability policy that caps at $20,000 per person, $40,000 per incident. I don't know. I've said this a lot. I'll say it again. I don't know about you, but anyone on this call probably knows that you walk into a hospital right now and sneeze, and you might have spent $20,000. So that money doesn't go very far. And people tend to purchase insurance to protect themselves, not the people with whom they're interacting. So I get into a car accident. I didn't buy a policy necessarily considering the person I was going to injure. I bought a policy considering what do I have to protect so that when that person gets injured and they come sue me, I have enough coverage. And that creates a really, really, really big problem because, as we often say in the health plan world, the participants don't even know what's being spent. They don't know what the charges are. They don't know what the deal is. They're playing with daddy's credit card, right? They're playing with someone else's money. And so it's not real to them. $100 a month on their premium and their auto insurance, which they pay, is real to them. They feel that. They have to write the check. So they are more likely to do something like, oh, I can reduce my coverage by $100,000 and save $100 a month or $50 a month or whatever. Or I can give you a more personal story. My sister is my insurance agent. And for years after I became a lawyer, she told me, Chris, you really need to have $250, $500 liability coverage with $1 million umbrella policy. And I said, why? And she's like, you're a lawyer. People think you have money. I'm like, but at first, I didn't have any money. All I had was $160,000 in student debt. And she goes, Chris, no one cares. No one knows that. They think you have money. They're more likely to sue you. Do you know how cheap it is to go from where you are, which I think was 100, 200 or something like that, to 255 with $1 million umbrella? And for years, I fought her and fought her and fought her. And then finally, she showed me, and it is dirt cheap to get yourself $1 million umbrella policy. Granted, you have to also max out your liability coverage. So the point is, when you have to write the check in your day-to-day, it's really easy to go, oh, I don't need that kind of coverage. I don't have that much to protect. I don't need to spend the extra $150 or whatever it is. Really easy to get to that place. So that's all a way to sort of lay out the problem that in the vast majority of large cases, there is very rarely enough money to go around. When we see $100,000 in available funds, that's a good day. We're very happy that we saw $100,000 in available insurance funds because more often than not, it's less than that.
Typically, it's state minimums, and unfortunately, you had mentioned Massachusetts as is 20, and there's even, if you can believe it, smaller limits in some states. And it is, as you mentioned, is very difficult to access those funds when we have, even if you have anything more than any treatment whatsoever, you are going to, the health plan is going to advance more typically than what we even have in coverage. So it can be very difficult to get to those points. And just a side note, sounds like your sister's a great insurance agent. I would say a lot of agents typically make the most money off of those state minimums because they have the least amount of liability. So it's very easy to have those pushed for those state minimums because a lot of the carriers pushed those policies. So just the general consumer doesn't understand exactly the consequences of those choices. And here in Kentucky, we have personal injury protection benefits that are, we have a state minimum, which a personal injury protection benefit, if you don't know, is to coverage, which is a no-fault coverage, which if I cause a wreck, I still would have access to my PIP benefits, my personal injury protection benefits. And in Kentucky, they're $10,000. They're not in every state. They may only have med pay. Some have nothing available. But if you do have those PIP benefits available, the problem in Kentucky, you don't have to use those for medical bills. Those can be used for anything. I mean, as far as if you have to have somebody mow your yard, you can use those PIP benefits for that. So it can be very challenging to even have access at first blush. It looks like we should have 10,000 out there. I just wanted to mention that when we're talking about limits and what those actually look like.
Yeah, for sure. That's good stuff. And let me also say this. I spent 7 minutes painting a very bleak picture. The good news is most subrogation cases are not large. 85% of subrogation cases are actually worth $25,000 or less. And so what we're going to talk about today really are the extremes, the one-offs. A lot of plans, when I get on the phone with them on these kinds of cases, they're like, I've never had a problem with this before. And I say, well, that's good. That's because these don't happen that often. But certainly when they happen, they can be jarring and difficult to maneuver. And so really now what we're talking about are those large cases for which we are doing everything we can to find as much money as possible. And if you're not doing it correctly or you're not digging enough, you can miss opportunities. I'll kind of kick us off here with the most famous case we have at Phia, And I know Cindy has an example or two as well that she's come across. The most famous case we have at Phia to illustrate this point is the Xbox case. The Xbox case came to us as a second pass, meaning the first vendor determined it was a fire at home and didn't do much after that, didn't investigate any further. They didn't go far enough to realize that the fire at home was caused by the Xbox that exploded. Now, you'll recall a few years ago, I believe, there were some concerns about Xboxes that maybe were prone to light up, if you will. That case ended up being a products liability against Microsoft. And the first vendor didn't find it because they didn't look hard enough. They didn't dig hard enough. It's not uncommon to see this happen. Oh, they fell at home. And what I like to say, home is a word with no meaning. Home is wherever you are. So home means different things to different people. And right now, home for me is an apartment that I lease. If I fall in my own apartment, chances are there's no liability. But if I fall out in the hallway or on the stairs or something, now there's a chance that there's third-party liability there. And so if you're not digging far enough, you might miss that there's a products liability claim against Microsoft on that claim. And so what was a closed case ended up being a six-figure recovery for that benefit plan because the plan asked us to take a second look. We found out exactly what happened. We found out that there was a products liability claim, and we were able to attach a reimbursement action to it. And so that's the most famous example we have at Phia, the one we talk about sort of in our travels. But cases like this happen every single day. Cindy, I know you had an example that you
Yeah, no, and I think that Xbox case is a good example of how hard we work here at Phia to make sure that we have investigated each claim fully. I've had a case, and it's timely given all of the Microsoft and everything we're talking about and the bank closures, but I had a case that occurred in Northern California. And essentially, it was an assault case, a road rage incident, and that was outside of the vehicle. So essentially, a guy beat up another guy or girl beat up another girl, and the offender happened to be a Silicon Valley executive who the health plan was actually able to get a pretty significant recovery for significant injuries because that person had the assets in which the member in the plan could pursue. So at first blush, this case didn't look too exciting or with a high probability of significant recovery. And ultimately, on that case, we were able to keep pushing, and there was a significant recovery. That is a very unique circumstance. And the reason I'm bringing it up is it doesn't typically occur, but it can occur. And the only way it can occur is if the plan continues to push and follow some of these cases very closely. I've had another case, and this is a situation that occurs, but a lot of people don't think about the third party liability portion or element or potential. I've had cases where trees have fallen and there could be an action against the property owner. So the basic example is a kid is walking down the street on the sidewalk, and then the tree falls on them and the member has significant injuries. And in those cases, if there's expert testimony out there that this landowner knew or should have known about that tree being either dead or having disease, then there could be a successful recovery to the plan for the benefits advanced by the plan for the member. And that is something that is not a typical third party situation, but we still have to have some investigation on that. But it can be more of a surprise recovery for us. And I also wanted to mention sometimes at first blush, a case that we believe, if it's an auto case, that it turns out the member didn't have insurance in the at-fault party and nobody seems to have insurance. It can be that in some states, depending on the auto policy, it could be that the member is afforded coverage through a person who lives in the same residence. So I had a case one time that it didn't look like anybody had insurance, and we had significant amount of benefit advanced by the plan, but the attorney kept pushing because there was a significant injury and was able to find and locate this coverage. And what is important is that we continue to push on that case and work with that member's attorney and follow that to achieve the recovery back to the plan.
Yeah, and it really is interesting. I have a case, it's sitting on my desk, literally. It's been the only case I've worked on for seemingly 2 weeks now. Again, it really sort of illustrates some of these points. We've got pretty significant car accident. We have a minor with hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. Fortunately, and I say that, it's fortunately, unfortunately, the accident was caused by a truck, a commercial truck. And those tend to come with higher limits, very often at least $1 million. The CFO of the plan is adamant that it's got to be more than that. And unfortunately, what he doesn't realize is that, again, much like consumers, companies tend to insure themselves against their risk, not necessarily the risk to others, right? It's a small trucking company, so they can get away with only having $1 million in coverage. And we can debate whether that's prudent, but that's what they're required to have, so that's what they have. The CFO is having a hard time coming around to that. But even in that case, we're working on finding some more money. We're putting pressure on the tortfeasor, the company, to put in some more money out of their coffers. We're making some progress there. We're not sure how much more it's going to be, but it's important to understand, as I'm talking to the CFO, he's really pushing me on how do you know, how do you know, how do you know? Well, in this case, I know for sure because there's also an underinsured motorist policy. And the thing about umbrella policies when they exist and underinsured motorist policies, those coverages don't even become eligible until all other coverage has been exhausted. So in order for the UIM policy to kick in, all coverage that trucking company has to be exhausted. Then the underinsured motorist coverage will kick in. Same thing is true with umbrella policies. All coverage within that policy, if you will, so any liability policies have to be exhausted before that coverage is even eligible. But the point is, even in this case, where we know there's $1 million plus the $100,000 uninsured motorist policy, we're still trying to put some pressure on this trucking company to see if they'll empty their pockets a bit more. And they're making some concessions there. Maybe it's because they do have concerns that they're underinsured. And, maybe a court would rule that they didn't have adequate insurance and accordingly they have to come up with the money. Obviously, that's risky for them. But these are all strategies that you have to be conscious of. And you have to be sort of aware of how the dynamics of all these work. And then you have to be able to capitalize on the opportunity in the 1 in 1,000 times that it shows up. Because it doesn't show up a ton. And some plans might go their entire existence to not see a case like this. But obviously, Cindy and I are in a world where we see this much more often. And so it just really highlights how important it can be, even though these cases are few and far between, they're impactful for obvious reasons. And so it's really, really important to understand how the dynamics of all this works and what pressure points you can possibly utilize to push. But it's always interesting when I'm on the phone with a plan, they seem to not want to believe that we looked into it. There's nothing else there. There's no more money because obviously we all want there to be more money. The injured person wants there to be more. The attorney for the injured person wants there to be more. The plan wants there to be more, and we want there to be more. We don't get paid by the hour. We get paid based on percentage of what we recover, percentage of savings. So it's the only area of a motor vehicle accident / subrogation case where everybody's on the same page. We all want there to be more money. Then we have to fight over how it's going to get divvied up. I don't know if you had any other examples, Cindy, but if you don't, I think what's that?
No, I don't. I think that we've highlighted quite a bit of the looking under rocks to find some good cases.
It's a delicate balance. There's always another rock, right? How do you know when it's time to stop looking? In legal research in law school, they used to tell us, when you stop finding cases, it's probably time to stop looking. Notice they didn't say, you found all the cases. They just said, well, if you can't find any more, it's probably time to stop looking. But so it's really understanding when is that tipping point where it's like, okay, there's a very slim chance that we're going to find anything here. We've done all the due diligence that we can reasonably do. Probably time to cut the cord. It's why a lot of administrators and plans outsource this, right? There's still some administrators that are holding on. They're trying to do the subrogation in-house. It's a full-time job in and of itself if it's going to be done effectively. And so that's the value of having someone who does nothing but that. right? Does nothing but what Cindy and I are talking about, and that's finding money, fighting for money, and putting plans in a position to not get all their money back all the time, because that's not what's possible. That may be what the law makes possible, but as a practical matter, it's a very, very difficult to get all your money back all the time. But what we do is put you in a position to get as much of it back as possible. That's really the name of the game. So with that, I guess I can give everyone back their time, the rest of their day. Thank you so much for anyone who's listening. I've recently learned that there are people listening, and that makes me all warm inside to know that people choose to listen to what I and Cindy have to say. So thank you so much for your time. Any questions or anyone wants to sort of talk about this topic in more depth, I'm always available. We're always available. Please do not hesitate to pick up the phone and call us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.